So I want to talk some tonight about hope and faith. and as I thought about this, these are not concepts that we always associate with the Buddhist path. You hear these terms more in sort of the deistic religions as opposed to our particular path. But and I'm not going to talk about the sort of blind faith that accept things, suffer in this life and you'll have a happy time in the next life. That's not the kind of faith and hope I'm obviously going to talk about. But I am going to talk about sort of some of the nuances of these concepts and how I think they apply to our particular teachings. And part of what prompted this was thinking about that we're coming up on the anniversary of August 12th and the sort of hopelessness and despair that really pervaded our community in August of last year. And what's happened in this year and how the community has tried and continues to try to right itself in response to that. But also thinking that there were moments, still are moments of hope and faith in that experience. I think it surfaced some issues in our community that really needed to be surfaced, that we're struggling with, we continue to struggle with. But I think that's a good thing. I think they've been buried for far too long. They've been this, I talk about how Charlottesville has had this sort of self-congratulatory stance about how progressive we were on issues of race and social justice, which in fact I think is not the case. And I think some of what happened last summer helped bring that out of the woodwork. But there was a lot of anxiety. I think there's anxiety coming up on the anniversary. It's in the news today again. What's going to happen? There's planning going on with the police. There's a lot of uncertainty about who's going to show up. But I like to think that hope will prevail as we come into this anniversary, and that we try to grab onto this idea that and have some faith in the notion that we can come together as a community and heal ourselves and continue to heal and heal some of the long-standing wounds. I mean, wounds that go back to the days of slavery and that horrible legacy that we still live with. And I would postulate that hope and faith are interwoven. They're really interwoven. They're not separable, that you can't have hope without faith. Desmond Tutu said, hope is being able to see that there is light despite all the darkness. And I really, really like that quote. Hope being an attitude of the heart and mind, however subtle, that is essential for this human life. It's sort of the thing that gets us out of bed in the morning. Well, I hope it's going to be a pretty good day. Hope it doesn't rain. Hope my kids are okay. The belief that things can and will improve even if we're struggling, even if we're suffering. Now, not to be confused with expectation, which tends to focus on a specific outcome. And we know where that gets us. If we latch onto a specific outcome, if we cling to that, as the Buddha says again and again, we're going to suffer. So I'm not talking about that kind of hope. Well, I hope that my picnic doesn't get rained out, and if it does, I'm going to be miserable. That's sort of more wishful thinking, more almost can be self-deluding at times, that sort of hope. I'm talking about a more active, realistic outlook, a sort of a spacious perspective. We talk a lot about spaciousness, and I'm talking about a spacious view of hope. And we need to be aware that in that mix is this notion of attachment, this notion that attachment can sometimes pose as hope. It can sort of look like hope, but it's really not. It's really clinging. And that distinction, even though it can be fairly nuanced, is a very, very important distinction. Hope is by its very nature tied to uncertainty. We have no way of predicting outcomes, and if we try to, and if we get attached to them, we suffer. So by its very nature, hope involves a huge degree of uncertainty. And that's why we talk about it broadly and not specifically. We talk about it as a generalized way of looking at the world, a generalized perspective. Change happens, impermanence happens. Faith and hope help us recognize this. Faith and hope help us see this. Faith and hope help us weather those storms that come from change, come from impermanence, come from the winds of being battered around. I've had periods in my own life, and perhaps you have as well, that were characterized by hopelessness. And in those moments of despair or hopelessness, I would see a specific outcome as the way out of my suffering. And that's where we're really vulnerable, I think, to clinging, is when we're in a state of despair or hopelessness. We look for a specific outcome. If only such and such would happen, my suffering will go away. It's such a trap. And boy, have I been caught in it a lot. Because again, we're looking at that specific outcome. There's the trap. And so what I realized, usually in hindsight, once things kind of got better and my hopelessness lessened, was that I needed to find a more generalized hope, that my suffering was impermanent, that I remembered that even as bad as it was, this too shall pass, that I wasn't locked into it, stuck in it, that I was not destined to suffer forever, that things would get better. That's the kind of hope, that's the kind of faith I'm talking about, a general sense that things were going to get better, not a sense that if X happens, then all will be well. And I want to really emphasize that distinction. And it really requires patience and wisdom. We cultivate wisdom with our practice. And that was really a necessary requirement along with my hope, was the patience to hang in there and the wisdom to know that things would change. Can't emphasize that enough. And I had still do have a wonderful teacher who kept emphasizing this to me, kept reminding me, Jeff, this too shall pass. Don't get locked into specific solutions, because all it's going to do is bog you down. All it's going to do is make the change less likely to occur. You just got to go with it. You just got to let go with the flow. And in fact, things change for the better. I mean, they do. They don't always. We can't promise that. If we have a chronic terminal illness, that may not get better. But our outlook doesn't have to be determined or informed by that. And so my hope in that scenario was verified, and this then gives us confidence to continue to cultivate hope and to continue to cultivate the faith that things can and will get better. So let me talk for just a moment about faith, which is sort of, as I said a little while ago, the prerequisite for hope. Confirmed faith, this notion of confirmed faith, which is based upon knowledge, it's not just a hunch, it's confirmed. I think that, I have faith that it's going to rain tomorrow, and it rains tomorrow. That's confirmation of that faith, that my plants will get water tomorrow. But more importantly, it's the knowledge that the Dharma will make good on the promise of what the Buddha taught. That's the kind of faith ultimately I'm talking about. The promise that the Dharma works, that the path which the Buddha has outlined, which for 2,600 years has continued to thrive because it works. And it's not religious dogma. It's not adherence to some sort of pie in the sky. It's a pragmatic kind of sense that I have faith that if I follow this path that people have followed for millennia, that things can get better. And it's trusting in the truth that the Buddha's teachings can be relied upon to liberate us from suffering. That's the kind of faith I'm talking about. The Buddha said, faith is the beginning of all good things. In other words, no matter what we encounter in life, it's the faith that enables us to try again, to get up, try again, trust again, and love again. We have enough faith that even if we're knocked down, that wonderful Zen saying, I have it somewhere, I'll find it in a minute, but knock down 8 times, 7 times get up 8, I think is poor reinterpretation of that. But that even in the depths of our suffering, our faith reminds us that things change, that we can move forward, and that our suffering is not permanent. But then neither is our joy. I mean, we can't get attached to that either. I mean, the faith that suffering is not permanent, but we need to remember neither is joy. Because the disappointment of the joy going away can also be, if we're clinging to that joy, can also be a source of suffering. The word that we normally translate as faith from the Pali language, which is, as you know, the language of the original Buddhist text, is saddha, S-A-D-D-H-A, which literally means, quote, to place the heart upon. I love that translation, to place the heart upon. To give our hearts over, to place our hearts upon something, to believe in something. For instance, faith can mean trust. Trust that our path is true even when we experience doubt about it. It can mean inspiration, that we're inspired to tackle the challenges that come our way. Or confidence. Faith can mean confidence. The confidence that our past experience give us some roadmap, give us some guidance about where things might end up. And that we're motivated to meet difficulty knowing that we've overcome difficulty in the past. That we cultivate that kind of confidence, that kind of faith. Sharon Salzberg talks about this in her book called Faith. And she distinguishes between what she calls bright faith and verified faith. And I really like this teaching. She says bright faith is what we experience when we meet someone who's very impressive, who seems to have all the answers. This guru or teacher who's going to alleviate all our suffering, who's going to save us. And all this does, she says, is set us up for disappointment and exploitation. We see this all the time. Just another scandal in the Buddhist world recently in the Shambhala community about exploitation. People had entrusted this person, this teacher, this guru, and only to find out that he's exploiting his students. And she goes on to say that the problem with bright faith is that it's unreliable. That no matter how impressive someone is, how impressive a teacher might be, they're going to disappoint us sooner or later. That everyone has clay feet, even the most revered teacher. Sooner or later, we're going to see their clay feet. And she contrasts this with verified faith, which I alluded to earlier, which is when we've actually practiced or explored something for ourselves, and in doing so, we've opened up to that experience. We've verified it by our own experience of practice. In the Kalama Sutta, the Buddha said in response to a question about accepting his teachings, you may know this teaching as an example, he says, quote, "Of course you are uncertain, Kalamas. Of course you are in doubt. When there are reasons for doubt, uncertainty is born. So in this case, don't go by reports, by legends, by traditions, by scripture, by logical conjecture, by inference, by analogies, by agreement through pondering views, by probability, or by the thought, this contemplative is our teacher. When you know for yourselves that these qualities are unskillful, these qualities are blameworthy, these qualities are criticized by the wise, these qualities, when adopted and carried out, lead to harm and suffering, then you should abandon them." End quote. In other words, I think he's saying, don't take my word for it. Go see for yourself. He says this again and again throughout the suttas. He says, don't take my word for it. Don't just believe me. Try it out. See if it works. And that's the feeling that we have about our own path, about the sense of being able to place our hearts upon it, is now rooted in our own experience, and it's strengthened because we've placed our own heart and we've experienced it, and it works. And those of us that practice this know that. We know that it works. We see the change in our lives. Other people respond to us differently. We get feedback that this stuff works. It's verified. It's verified faith. What some call unshakable faith. There's verification of what the Buddha taught. And we know it to be true from our own experience. So it's the hope that it will happen, the faith that it's going to happen, and the hope supports that faith. Now, the opposite of faith is doubt. Doubt undermines hope. Doubt being one of the 5 hindrances that we talk about here, the hindrances to our practice. And so it's very important that we're mindful of doubt, and when doubt begins to creep in, we need to keep our antenna up for that. We need to be aware, here comes the doubt, because it comes in lots of forms, it comes in lots of subtle ways. Just to remember the other 4 hindrances in addition to doubt are sensual desire and greed, ill will and aversion, sloth and torpor, and restlessness. But for tonight's purposes, we're just going to focus on doubt is sort of the opposite, or the hindrance that most impacts faith. So we may doubt the teachings. I don't know about this stuff. I don't think it really works. We may doubt if our practice is correct. I'm not doing this right. I'm a terrible meditator. We may doubt our teachers. They don't know. That guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just up there talking nonsense. We may doubt the experiences that we're having. Doubt may arise in a disguise in the form of us believing our own thoughts, our own questioning. Sometimes it sneaks in that way. We really believe our own doubts, our own questions. So it is said that when the mind is trying to figure out some aspect of our practice, doubt is often present. When we're really wrestling with it, doubt is often in the picture. Just to be aware of it. It's one of the hindrances. And it's a dangerous hindrance because often it's unnoticed and it can pull us out of our practice completely. It can really undermine our practice. And of course, we all have doubt. We bring it to our practice every day. But it's knowing about it, it's being aware of it, it's being mindful of it, it's paying attention to it. Because otherwise it's just insidious, it gets underneath and just eats away at our faith and our hope and what we can achieve through this path. Now there's good doubt. I don't want to say that all doubt is a negative thing. There's inquisitive doubt that leads us, that opens us to learning new things. Gosh, I would wonder what that's about. But overall, the antidote to doubt is, the negative sort of doubt is just to notice it, as with the other hindrances. It begins to break down as we notice it. Oh, there it is again. There I'm doubting that this is the way I need to be practicing. The other antidote is to cultivate the faith or the conviction as we reflect on the benefits of our practice. We just use faith as an antidote to the doubt. So the most effective thing we can do with it is just bring awareness to its arising. Watch it arise, look at it, examine it, and then move on. Get back to our practice, get back to our faith. So whenever we're caught in thoughts of trying to figure something out, as I said a moment ago, or reasoning with ourselves, just check in with yourself, see if doubt is present. Why am I really wondering about this? Why am I really questioning my practice? Chances are doubt is crept in. And one of the problems with doubt is it turns us into victims. Oh, woe is me. I can't do this right. And it tends to make us personalize what is happening to us. Oh, why me? Poor me. Why is the universe doing this to me? And as victims, hope shrinks. When a victim stance, hope really is hard to maintain. Here's the Zen saying I was looking for earlier. Fall 7 times, stand up 8. Is a statement of faith, a statement of hope. So I want to close with a quote from Sharon Salzberg from her book, of Faith. She says, quote, our passion, Our joy, our calm, and our confidence are all rooted in this offering of our hearts to an expanded vision of who we truly are and the love and awareness that we are capable of. Let me just read that again. Our passion, our joy, our calm, and our confidence are all rooted in this offering of our hearts to an expanded vision of who we truly are and the love and awareness that we are capable of. With this understanding, we don't have to approach our suffering as though cut off from love and the pulsing of life. We can remember that suffering doesn't have to close us down and lead to despair, as though stranded in a world where goodness is for others and others exist at a remove from us. Holding this vision, we can emerge from whatever suffering we encounter, not broken and embittered, but with an ever-replenishing wellspring of unwavering faith. End quote. So, thank you. We have a few minutes if there's any questions or comments. Any doubts?
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
I would find it helpful if you could please compare and contrast hope with equanimity.
I think hope and faith are often forward-looking as I think about them. Equanimity is sort of steadiness in the storm now. It's sort of maintaining a sense of not being knocked off balance in the present moment, in this moment. It's a simple way that I think about it. Yes. Judy will bring you the mic.
I have heard it said that the opposite of faith is not doubt, but fear. Comments?
Yeah, I've heard that as well. I don't disagree with it. I think there can be multiple opposites of faith. Fear certainly undermines faith. Fear certainly undermines hope. It undermines equanimity. It's a very toxic experience that I think it's part of our practice. It's important we learn to work with it constructively, hold it lightly.
Just a comment that it's very, very hard for me to separate the words hope and faith from a Christian background. And I think that will take the rest of my life.
Yeah.
But it's worth doing.
I couldn't agree
for
more.
Me. Yeah.
I mean, I grew up with those same concepts, and that's why I sort of made the disclaimer early in the talk about that's not the kind of hope and faith I'm talking about. And these are not terms you hear a lot in Buddhist teaching. I mean, they're just, I think when Sharon Salzberg's book came out, Faith, probably 10 or 15 years ago, it was a real shocker. I mean, people are like, whoa, she's really gone off the rails here. But you read that book, and it is very profound, and the teachings are really powerful. So, but thank you. Yeah, I think many of us in the room probably struggle with that. Yes, Greg.
One of the things that I've always thought about is that faith is a personal sort of thing, and you put it in the thing of that the Dharma will take care of you. Hope is more of a communal thing. You're hoping that the whole world will come to that sort of realization and subsequently make it a better world. So I kind of see one as personal, two as more communal.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Wait a minute.
Just in follow-up to what Judy was saying, I don't think you necessarily have to leave behind the connection to a Christian faith and hope if it's a mature faith and hope in the Christian faith. Right. I think there's a distinction there from old school teaching and an alive faith and hope.
Yeah, good point. Thank you.
I once took a course in which people, well, it was sort of examining ourselves and our lives and becoming aware. And we would declare things that we wanted to happen in our lives or things that our goals. And people would say, well, I hope, I'm going to go to school and I hope I will do well enough so that then I can become an architect or whatever. Anyway, they were saying hope is not a very powerful word. It's better to use the phrase intention. My intention is blah, 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 rather than I hope. Because when you hope, it's like, well, maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. And maybe I'm getting that kind of hope mixed up with the hope that the Buddha is talking about. So can you kind of differentiate between that? Because I found that helpful for me.
Yeah.
I try not to use the word hope anymore. I just say my intention is that you get better or that whatever.
Well, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, Linda, about hope not being attached to a specific outcome. So it's a more global perspective. So I would just make that distinction. I mean, intention's fine, but intention is often going to involve a specific outcome. And if we don't achieve that, then we can suffer. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have goals and intentions. I'm just saying, but with the awareness that there's a broader hope, that things change, that impermanence exists, that suffering comes and goes, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's an opportunity to really explore this teaching because I think there's so much hopelessness for many of us about what went on in Charlottesville and what's going on in the world. And, how do we manage that? How do we sit with that? Can we see it as impermanent, that this too shall pass, whatever this is that is troubling to me? So, Anne-Marie had a question or comment.
It's not a question so much as just a recent experience, a little story I wanted to share that I think goes along very much with what you're saying. Personally, I experienced a lot of hopelessness in the past year as a result of what happened here in Charlottesville last August and just throughout all of last year. But I had the experience very recently of going to the Albemarle County Jail when they were discussing revisiting whether or not to turn folks who had been arrested over to ICE. And there were a lot of people from the community, some who are here right now, who spoke very eloquently there. And I realized for the first time in a long time that I did feel hope, and it was because people showed up, they spoke up, they cared about the suffering of someone other than themselves. And that gave me hope again, and also faith actually in change. And it was very that hour or so was very transformative in that way. And so I appreciate your talk, and that came to mind as soon as you said what the topic was. So I thank you for that.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Anne-Marie, thanks for sharing that. Okay, why don't we just sit for a minute and then we'll call it a day. Thanks for your time and attention. See you next week.